Suppose I ask you to write a query to display the payments made by each client, and I wanted you to list the client ID, last name, and the payment amount. Your QBE grid would include the client ID, the last name, and the payment amount. When you ran the query, a record would display every time a client made a payment. For example, client J7500 made a payment of $100, a payment of $200, and a payment of $50. Therefore, there are 3 records in the dataset. Let's say I would like to write a query that lists how many payments were made by each client, their total payments, and their average payments. I wanted to list the client ID, last name, the number of payments made, the total dollar amount, and the average amount of the payments. I would use the Group By feature to summarize the fields. I can calculate the average, the minimum, the max, the sum, etc. To do this, I would select the groups I want to aggregate, and then I would select the function of the desired field. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see the various ways you can aggregate or summarize your data. Let's go back to the original question. Write a query to display how many payments were made by each client, their total payments, and their average payments. List the client ID, last name, number of payments made, and the total dollar amount and average amount of the payments. To accomplish this in Access, click on the Create tab, click on Query Design, add the Client table and the Payments table, add the Client ID field to the grid, the Last Name field to the grid, the Client ID from the Payments table, and the Amount field twice. Click on the Totals icon. Notice a new row displays, titled Total, and the keyword Group By displays in each field. Because we want to summarize the information by client, we will use the Group By on the Client ID and the Group By on the last name. We want to count the number of times the client made a payment, so we will use the Count function. We want to sum the total amount of the payments, and we would like to average the payments. When you run the query, the dataset displays 1 record for every client that made a payment. For example, client ID J7500 made 3 payments, but there is only 1 record that displays for this client. The record summarizes the information. To summarize the information by client ID and last name, you use the Group By function in the QBE grid under the client ID and the last name field. We're displaying the number of payments made by the client, the total sum of all the payments, and the average amount of all the payments. Notice the new field names: Count of Client ID, Sum of Amount, Average of Amount. These fields are virtual fields, meaning they will exist as long as the query exists. The new fields are comprised of the aggregate function you perform and the field name in the QBE grid. For example, the field we are using for the Count aggregate function is the Client ID field. The dataset field is Count of Client ID, capital C, capital O. When you're using this in calculations, you have to spell this field exactly as you see it. Likewise, Sum of Amount and AVG of Amount. The paper QBE grid is shown on the screen. Notice the total row is now filled in. If you are not summarizing or aggregating information, the total row should be blank. Let's look at another example. Write a query to summarize by client all the charges made after 5/1/2008. Add a surcharge of 20% to these charges. List the client ID, last name, original charge, and new charge. In this query, we will need the client table and the charges table. Add the client ID to the grid, the last name, the charge amount, the charge date, and add the totals row. We are summarizing by client ID, therefore we will use the group by. We are also summarizing by last name, so we will use the group by. We are summing the amount, so we will use the sum function. The charge date will have a criteria of greater than 5/1/2008. Because we have a criteria in an aggregate function, we will use the keyword where. Notice when you use the keyword where, the check mark is automatically taken off that field. The criteria field can never be shown when you're aggregating or summarizing information. The criteria is greater than 5/1/2008. Notice the pounds surrounding the date field. The Dynaset will display the total charges for each client that made a charge after 5/1/2008. The question asks you to also calculate the surcharge and display it. The surcharge is 20% of the amount. Notice I'm using the field sum of amount in my calculation. When I summarized the amount in the third column of the QBE grid. If the third column, which summarizes the amount, is deleted from the query, I cannot use the sum of amount field in the calculation. Also note, when you're summarizing information, you must use the keyword expression when you're creating a calculated field. Click the Show button on the QBE grid, run the query, and the new field is displayed. To display the new charge field as currency, click on the column that contains the new charge, click on Properties, click on Format, click on Currency, run the query, and the field will now display as currency. A paper copy of the completed QBE grid is shown on the screen. In this query, we are displaying the min and the max of the payments by client. A summary of the total row options is displayed on the screen. Please take a few minutes to make sure you understand all of these concepts.